There is something quietly devastating about being alone in a room full of people who are celebrating love. Marcus had learned to carry that feeling the way you carry an old scar, not with fresh pain, but with a kind of dull ache that surfaces at unexpected moments. Like now, sitting at a circular table near the tall windows of the Harrington Grand Ballroom, watching white flower arrangements catch the afternoon light, holding a teacup between both hands the way his mother had taught him when he was 7 years old. He was 41, though people often thought he was younger. He wore his navy suit the way a man wears armor, carefully, deliberately, hoping it communicated something about who he wanted to be rather than who he currently was. A single father. A man whose wife had walked out 3 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon, leaving behind a handwritten note on the kitchen counter and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting at the table drawing butterflies with crayons, completely unaware that her world was quietly rearranging itself. Marcus had been invited to this wedding by his old college friend, Daniel, whose younger sister was getting married today. It was a gracious invitation and Marcus had accepted it because Lily was spending the weekend with her grandmother, and his therapist, a soft-spoken woman who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, had gently suggested that he needed to practice being in the world again. So here he was. Practicing. He lifted the teacup and took a slow sip, watching the room fill with guests in their evening clothes. Couples arrived arm in arm. Old friends found each other across the room with small waves and delighted expressions. The chandeliers above cast everything in warm golden light that made even strangers look beautiful and familiar. Marcus watched it all from his quiet corner table and felt the distance between himself and all of it like a physical thing, like glass. He set his cup down and reached into his jacket pocket, intending to check his phone, not because anyone would be calling, but because holding a phone gives a person something to do with their hands when they are trying not to look as alone as they feel. That was when he heard her voice. It came from just behind his left shoulder, low and deliberate, like someone sharing a carefully considered secret. "Excuse me, young man. I am going to ask you something unusual, and I need you to say yes before I explain why. Do you think you can trust an old woman for just a few minutes?" Marcus turned slowly. She was standing behind his chair, a woman in her late 60s, perhaps 70, with silver hair arranged in an elegant updo and warm brown eyes that held the particular quality of someone who has survived enough of life to no longer be frightened by much of it. She wore a black lace gown with long sleeves and a full skirt, and around her neck was a single strand of pearls. She was holding her small evening bag in both hands, and her expression was composed but urgent, the way a chess player looks when they are about to make a bold and necessary move. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry. I do not have a great deal of time," she said quietly, with the careful precision of someone who had learned to say exactly what she meant. "My name is Eleanor. And I need you to pretend, for the next 20 minutes, that you are my daughter's fiancé. Her name is Victoria. She is about to walk through that door. And I will explain everything after, but right now I simply need a kind-looking young man who is sitting alone and who might be willing to help a mother protect her child from a very painful moment." Marcus stared at her. In another version of himself, the version from before Tuesday afternoon and the handwritten note, he might have politely declined, cited social discomfort, made an excuse. But something in Eleanor's eyes reminded him of something he could not quite name. A kind of quiet desperation dressed in dignity. The look of a person doing the best they can with an impossible situation. He heard himself say, "Sit down and tell me what's happening." Eleanor exhaled, just slightly, and took the chair beside him. She spoke quickly but clearly, her voice never rising above a comfortable murmur even as the words themselves carried considerable weight. "Victoria is 38 years old. She has been engaged twice before. Both times the men in question decided, in the end, that he did not want a woman who was, as one of them put it, too much. She is brilliant and she is beautiful and she has never once in her life been the kind of woman who makes herself small for other people's comfort. Her father and I raised her that way on purpose. We wanted her to take up space in the world." Eleanor paused. "Her father passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Very quick." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. Eleanor accepted this with a small nod. "Victoria does not know I have been corresponding with her ex-fiancé, James, for several months. He wanted to speak with me about reconciliation, he called it. I agreed to meet him here today because I thought perhaps I had misjudged him. But I received a message an hour ago from his sister, who is a kinder person than he is, warning me that James is here not to reconcile but to humiliate. He has told several people in this social circle that Victoria is the reason their engagement ended. That she was cold and difficult. He wants to see her walk into this room alone so that the story he has been telling becomes the picture everyone remembers. She folded her hands on the table with remarkable composure. I will not allow that to happen. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Where is she now? Just outside. She texted me 2 minutes ago. She is gathering herself in the hallway. She always does that before she enters a room. Takes 3 deep breaths. She has done that since she was a little girl. Something moved briefly across Eleanor's face, the particular tenderness of a parent watching a child carry burdens that were not fairly given to them. I need her to walk in and see something that tells a different story. Even for 20 minutes. Just long enough for James to understand that his little performance will have no audience. Marcus looked down at his teacup. He thought about Lily, sitting at that kitchen table with her crayons. He thought about the particular unfairness of someone else deciding what story gets told about your life. He looked back at Eleanor. What's her favorite thing to talk about, he said. If we're going to do this, I want to be able to actually hold a conversation with her. Eleanor's expression shifted into something that was almost, quietly, a smile. Architecture, she said. And old films. And the absolute impossibility of finding a good bookshop anymore. Marcus nodded once. Tell me one fact about her that only her mother would know. Eleanor considered this. When she is nervous, she touches the back of her left ear. Just briefly. Like she is checking to make sure her earring is still there. Okay, Marcus said. He straightened his jacket and turned his chair slightly to face the main entrance. What does she look like? He did not need the answer. Because at that precise moment, the tall doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a woman walked in wearing a red dress. Marcus would struggle later to explain exactly what happened in the first moment of seeing her. It was not the dress, though the dress was extraordinary, floor-length, the deep red of old wine, fitted in a way that suggested she had chosen it not to impress anyone but simply because it was the truest expression of how she felt about herself. It was not even her face, though her face had the kind of clear-eyed composure that Marcus recognized immediately as something earned rather than inherited. It was the way she walked. She walked the way people walk when they have decided, somewhere along the road, to stop apologizing for the space they occupy. Shoulders back. Eyes forward. The ghost of some private determination in every step. And then, just for a fraction of a second, her eyes swept the room in that particular way that people do when they're looking for a friendly face and bracing themselves for the possibility of not finding one. Marcus raised his hand in a calm, unhurried wave. As though he had been expecting her. As though of course she would be here. As though there was northwest other place in the room he would rather be looking. Victoria stopped. She looked at him. Then at her mother, seated beside him. Eleanor smiled with the full and practiced ease of a woman who has been managing impossible situations with grace for decades, and she patted the empty chair on her other side in gentle invitation. Victoria walked toward them. Marcus stood as she approached, not because anyone had told him to but because it felt like the right thing to do, the way his father had always stood when his mother entered a room, an old and unhurried courtesy that Marcus had absorbed without realizing it. You must be Marcus, Victoria said. Her voice was lower than he had expected and entirely steady. He was not sure what Eleanor had texted in those few seconds, but he was grateful for whatever it said. I've heard good things, he said simply, and pulled out her chair. She sat. She looked at her mother with an expression that contained about 14 different questions, and Eleanor met that look with the particular serenity of someone who has decided to tell the whole truth in approximately 15 minutes and is completely comfortable with that timeline. You look wonderful, Eleanor said to her daughter. Red was absolutely the right choice. Victoria's mouth curved slightly. You told me not to wear red to a wedding. I was wrong, Eleanor said simply. It happens occasionally. Marcus watched this exchange with something warming quietly in his chest. The shorthand between mothers and daughters. The entire architecture of a relationship compressed into 2 sentences. He refilled Victoria's teacup from the pot on the table without asking, and she glanced at him with brief surprise and then something that might have been the beginning of curiosity. My mother says you're a friend of Daniel's, she said. Since college, he confirmed. He's one of the few people I know who is exactly the same person at 40 that he was at 22. I find that genuinely reassuring. Victoria tilted her head slightly. You think consistency is reassuring? I think it's rare, he said. And rare things tend to be reassuring once you find them. She considered this. Across the room, Marcus noticed without appearing to notice a man in a dark suit watching their table with an expression that had shifted from something anticipatory into something considerably more deflated. He was handsome in a practiced, aware-of-itself way, and he held his champagne glass like a prop. Marcus did not look at him again. He did not need to. "My mother mentioned you have a daughter," Victoria said. He felt the familiar small readjustment that happened whenever Lily entered a conversation. Not discomfort exactly, but a kind of careful attention, the way you are careful with something important. "Lily," he said. "She's 6. She is deeply convinced that clouds are made of wool and that caterpillars can hear music. I have not been able to find convincing scientific evidence to the contrary." Something happened in Victoria's expression then. It was subtle, a softening around the eyes, a shift in the set of her mouth. The kind of thing you only catch if you are paying close attention, which Marcus was. "When my daughter was 6, Eleanor said from across the table, with the comfortable authority of someone who knows they are telling a good story, she informed her entire class that the moon was a night light that God kept forgetting to turn off. Her teacher called me. I told him she was probably correct." Victoria laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and genuine, and in the laughing she touched the back of her left ear. Marcus looked at the table. He felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite joy but rather the particular feeling of a door opening that you had forgotten you had not closed. They talked. They talked the way people talk when they have unexpectedly found someone worth talking to, the sentences building on each other naturally, one thought leading to another without the awkward silences that Marcus had grown to dread in social situations. Victoria had opinions about architecture that were specific and passionate. She believed that most modern buildings were designed by people who had never been lonely in one. She felt that old films understood something about silence that newer ones had forgotten. She had given up finding good bookshops and had started a small lending library in the hallway of her apartment building, just a wooden crate with a handwritten sign, and it had become, she said this quietly, as though slightly embarrassed by how much it meant to her, something she looked forward to checking every morning. Marcus listened the way he had not listened to another person in a very long time. Not waiting for his turn to speak. Just listening. At some point, Eleanor excused herself to greet an old friend, and the two of them sat together in a pocket of conversation that felt oddly private despite the full and glittering room around them. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Yes." She looked at him with the direct, level quality he was already beginning to recognize as simply the way she looked at things. "My mother texted me something very strange before I walked in. She said, 'There is a kind man at table 9. I asked him a favor and he said yes without knowing the whole story. I think you should meet him for real.'" She paused. "What was the favor?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. All of it, plainly and without editing. Eleanor's whisper behind his chair. The man across the room. The 20 minutes. Victoria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her teacup. "And you just said yes," she said at last. "You looked like someone who deserved to walk into a room without someone else deciding what the story was," he said. "I know something about that, from a different angle." She looked at him. And in that look was the particular recognition that passes between two people who have both been through something genuinely difficult and have come out the other side still basically themselves, a little worn, a little careful, but fundamentally intact. "Your daughter sounds extraordinary," she said. "She really is," he said. "She worries me constantly and amazes me every single day. That seems to be how it works." "My father used to say the same thing about me," Victoria said. And for the first time, something briefly unguarded moved across her face, not sadness exactly, but the clean, undeniable shape of missing someone. "Your mother told me about him," Marcus said gently. "He would have liked you," she said. He had strong feelings about men who stood up when a woman approached a table. She smiled. He would have said it was old-fashioned. Then he would have said that some old-fashioned things stuck around because they were actually good. Eleanor returned to the table with the composure of a woman who has orchestrated a great deal and is too wise to appear pleased with herself about it. She settled into her chair and accepted a fresh cup of tea from Marcus with a small, dignified nod. "James left," she said, with the simplicity of a weather report. Victoria looked at her mother. "You are a piece of work, Eleanor Margaret Whitfield." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "But I am your piece of work, and I suggest we order something to eat because this tea is perfectly lovely but I am 80% certain it is the only thing keeping me upright." Marcus laughed. A real laugh, one that came from somewhere he had not visited in a while. Later, after dinner, after the first dance, after Eleanor had fallen into comfortable conversation with an old friend and left the two of them at the table again, Victoria turned to Marcus and said, "I would like to take you for coffee sometime. Not as anyone's pretend anything. Just as yourself." Marcus looked at her. The candlelight was doing something very warm to the room, and somewhere across the ballroom a slow song had begun, and he thought of Lily coming home Sunday afternoon with her grandmother's cookies in a paper bag and her shoes on the wrong feet because she always put them on in a hurry when she was excited to get somewhere. "I would like that," he said. "I should tell you up front, I come with a 6-year-old who believes in musical caterpillars. I come with a mother who schemes in ballrooms," Victoria said. "Then we're both entering this with full information," he said. She smiled. And it was the kind of smile that Marcus recognized, because his daughter had that same quality in her smile, the particular brightness of someone who has decided to trust the next moment even though the last few moments have given them plenty of reasons not to. Eleanor, across the table, lifted her teacup to her lips and did not smile, because she was far too composed for that. But she was absolutely, quietly, unreservedly pleased. Some of the best things in life begin with a stranger saying yes before they know the whole story. Some of the truest kindnesses are the ones offered across a distance, not because we know the person on the other side, but because we recognize something in them. Something that reminds us what it feels like to need someone to simply show up. Marcus had come to that ballroom to practice being in the world. What he had not expected was to find, sitting beside him at table 9, the beginning of a reason to stay in it. And Eleanor, wise, composed, quietly fierce Eleanor, had known that the best gift she could give her daughter was not protection from every difficult moment, but simply someone willing to sit beside her in one. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything.